She was fired after the Mafia boss's fiancé accused her of stealing food. Until he saw the footage, it was another busy evening at the luxurious mansion of Mafia boss Vincent Romano. The house was filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses, as well-dressed guests mingled in the grand dining room, savoring a meal prepared by the best chefs in town. But among the glittering crowd, there was one person who felt like a ghost. Maria, the black maid, quietly moved through the room, cleaning up after the guests, her head down, trying to be as invisible as possible. She had learned over the months that being invisible was the best way to survive in a house like this, especially when the people she served seemed to look right through her. Maria had been working in Vincent Romano's mansion for 2 years, doing the cleaning, cooking, and taking care of the children. She had always been quiet, doing her job with diligence, never complaining. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it paid the bills and allowed her to send money back home to her family. However, tonight, everything changed. Vincent's fiancée, Isabella, had been hosting a party for some of their wealthy friends. As usual, Maria was trying to stay out of the way, but she couldn't ignore the whispers that started to circulate. It wasn't long before Isabella, who had been drinking, approached Maria with a look of disdain. "What do you think you're doing?" Isabella sneered, eyeing the plate of food that Maria had just picked up. Maria froze. She had simply been taking a leftover dish to the kitchen when Isabella had noticed. "I am just cleaning up," Maria stammered, feeling the color rise in her cheeks. But Isabella wasn't having it. "I saw you," Isabella said, her voice sharp and accusing. "You were eating that food, weren't you? I can't believe you would steal from us." The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward Maria. She felt the weight of their stares, the embarrassment, the humiliation. Maria knew better than to argue. She had seen what happened to people who crossed Vincent, and she wasn't about to make a scene. But the words still stung. Isabella's face twisted in disgust as she continued, "You're fired. I won't have a thief working in my house." Maria's heart sank as Isabella's words echoed in her ears. Fired. The one thing she had worked so hard to avoid. Her hands shook as she gathered her things, trying not to cry. But as she made her way to the door, she felt a strange sense of relief. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a story that would change everything. Vincent Romano had been watching the scene unfold from across the room, but he hadn't spoken a word. It wasn't until much later, after the party had ended, that he decided to take matters into his own hands. He called for the footage from the security cameras. What he saw next would shock everyone, especially Maria. After the humiliating scene in the grand dining room, Maria spent the rest of the night in her small quarters, packing her belongings, her heart heavy with defeat. The mansion that had once felt like a safe haven now seemed like a prison, a place that had betrayed her when she needed it most. She had always known that she was just an employee, just someone to be overlooked, but never had she felt so disposable, so insignificant. She couldn't shake the image of Isabella's sneering face as she accused her of stealing food, the words echoing in her mind over and over. She had never stolen anything in her life. She wasn't a thief. But now, she was a nobody, fired without warning, without a second chance. She could already hear the whispers in the staff room, the judgment from the other employees who had never truly seen her. For a brief moment, she wondered if she should just leave, never return. But then she remembered the rent she had to pay for her small apartment, the bills she still had to settle, and the family she had to support back home. She couldn't just leave. But she also couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Maria's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on her door. She stood up quickly, wiping away the tears she didn't want anyone to see. When she opened the door, it was Vincent's head of security standing in the hallway, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Romano would like to speak with you," he said in a voice that was calm, but firm. Maria's stomach dropped. What did Vincent want with her? She hadn't expected to see him after the scene at the party. She had always kept her distance from him, never looking directly into his eyes, never speaking unless spoken to. She had learned long ago that staying invisible was the safest way to survive in his world. But now, it seemed like Vincent had taken an interest in her. As she followed the security guard down the long, marble hallway, she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread building in her chest. The mansion felt even colder now, as though the walls themselves were closing in on her. When they reached his office, the security guard opened the door and gestured for her to enter. Vincent was sitting behind his large mahogany desk, his face unreadable as always. "Come in, Maria," he said, his voice calm and measured. Maria stepped inside, her hands trembling slightly. She stood in front of the desk, unsure of what to do or say. Vincent studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "I've seen the footage," he said, his voice low but clear. Maria's heart skipped a beat. The footage? What did he mean? She hadn't even realized that there were cameras in the kitchen, let alone that Vincent would be watching. She felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her. "You were accused of stealing food," Vincent continued. "But when I watched the footage, I saw something different." Maria's confusion deepened. She had no idea what he was talking about. "You weren't stealing," Vincent said slowly. "You were simply cleaning up after the party, doing your job. Isabella accused you of something you didn't do, and I want to know why." Maria swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't steal anything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was just cleaning up. I wasn't trying to take anything." Vincent nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I believe you," he said quietly. "But I also believe that something else is going on here. Isabella has a tendency to accuse people when she doesn't understand them, and I don't think she sees you for who you really are." Maria couldn't believe what she was hearing. Vincent, the powerful mafia boss who controlled everything, was speaking to her like a human being, not an employee, not a servant. For the first time, she felt like she was being seen for who she really was. But there was something else in Vincent's gaze, something darker, more complicated. "You've been working here for 2 years, he said, his eyes searching hers. "And in all that time, you've never once made trouble. You've always done your job without complaint. I respect that." Maria was speechless. She had never expected Vincent to say anything like this to her. The respect she had always quietly hoped for seemed so distant, so impossible. But here it was, being offered to her now, in this quiet office. She was at a loss for words, but she nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Vincent leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the desk. "I want you to stay," he said. "I don't believe you should be punished for something you didn't do. And I don't want Isabella's accusations to ruin your reputation. But you need to understand something, Maria." He paused, his gaze hardening slightly. "You're not just a maid. You're more than that to me. And I'm going to make sure that everyone knows it." Maria felt a rush of emotions, surprise, relief, confusion, and something else she couldn't quite place. What did he mean by that? Why was he saying this now, after everything that had happened? The tension in the room thickened, and Maria's mind raced. This moment was changing everything. But the question was, how far would Vincent go to protect her? And what would happen next? Vincent sat back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Maria's face. There was something in the way he looked at her now, something different. Maria had spent 2 years in the mansion, always blending into the background, never daring to hope for anything more than just doing her job quietly and going home. But now, after everything that had happened, Vincent's words, his unexpected kindness, left her feeling both confused and strangely hopeful. She had expected to be shown the door, to be cast aside like so many others who had been in her position before. But instead, Vincent had shown her something she had never seen before, a respect she had longed for but never thought she would receive. Maria felt a slight tremor in her hands, but she forced herself to steady them. "I appreciate your understanding, Mr. Romano," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't want to cause any more trouble. I've been fired. I should leave." Vincent shook his head. "No, you're not leaving," he said firmly. "I don't tolerate injustice, and I'm not going to let someone as loyal as you walk out just because of an accusation that isn't true." His words struck her like a wave, and she could barely grasp what he was saying. She had been accused of something she didn't do, and yet, she had been ready to leave, to quit everything. But now, he was telling her she didn't have to. It was a strange feeling, one of relief, of validation, but also of confusion. Why was Vincent doing this for her? "But Isabella," Maria started, her voice faltering. Vincent's expression darkened slightly at the mention of his fiancée's name. "Don't worry about Isabella," he said, his tone hardening just a little. "She'll understand once I explain the situation. This isn't about her. This is about you, Maria. You've earned my trust, and that's all that matters." Maria's heart skipped a beat. Trust? In her? A maid, someone who had always felt like an invisible part of this grand mansion. always in the shadows, never part of the real world. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. "You're not just a maid," Vincent continued, his voice softer now. "You're a person, and I don't let good people go just because of a mistake or a misunderstanding." Maria stood there in shock, her mind racing. She had never heard someone in Vincent's world speak like this. But as much as it felt like a dream, she couldn't help but feel a strange pull toward him. She had been invisible for so long, but now he was offering her something more, something she had never thought she would have. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I don't want to cause any problems." Vincent smiled, a small but genuine smile that made his eyes soften. "There won't be any problems. You just keep doing your job, and I'll make sure you're treated right. You have my word." He stood up from his desk and walked around to where she stood, his movements purposeful. "I've got a lot of influence, Maria. If you stay, if you want to continue working here, I'll make sure you never have to deal with this kind of humiliation again. No one will accuse you of stealing. No one will look down on you." Maria swallowed hard, the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She had been on the edge of losing everything, and now, it seemed like she had been given a second chance. A second chance she wasn't sure she deserved. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's gaze softened as he looked at her, a flicker of something, maybe warmth, maybe understanding, passing through his eyes. "I'm sure," he said. "I'm not just giving you a second chance because of what happened with Isabella. I'm doing it because you deserve it. You've earned it. Now, I'm giving you the opportunity to show everyone else who you really are." His words hung in the air, and Maria felt a sense of awe settle in her chest. She didn't know what to think. She had never felt this seen, this understood, and yet, she was still hesitant. It was hard to trust in something that had always seemed so out of reach. But Vincent's words felt genuine, and his actions spoke louder than anything. "You don't have to worry about anything else," Vincent said, sensing her hesitation. "Just do your job, and I'll take care of the rest. You'll be treated with respect from now on, Maria. I'll make sure of it." She nodded slowly, still processing the weight of what he was offering her. Vincent turned to the side and picked up a phone from his desk. "I'll have someone send you the new schedule tomorrow," he said, dialing the number. "And I'll personally make sure Isabella understands that you're staying." Maria's mind was spinning. Everything had changed so quickly, so unexpectedly. She had gone from being humiliated, fired, and ready to leave, to being given a second chance, by the very person who had the power to make everything disappear. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. As Vincent hung up the phone and looked at her with that same unreadable expression, Maria could feel the tension lifting. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who mattered. She wasn't invisible anymore. And with that realization, Maria knew that she had just stepped into a new chapter of her life. One that would be filled with challenges, but also with possibilities she had never imagined before. The following morning, Maria woke up with a sense of uncertainty. The mansion felt different, the same grand halls, the same marble floors, but today, the weight of what Vincent had said lingered heavily in her mind. She wasn't sure what to expect now. Everything had shifted so quickly. Just yesterday, she had been fired, humiliated in front of the guests, and now she had been offered a second chance, a chance she never thought she would get. As she prepared herself for the day ahead, she couldn't help but feel a strange mix of hope and fear. She had never been treated like this before. Vincent's words echoed in her mind, but so did the thought of Isabella. What would she say when she found out that Vincent had taken her side? Maria wasn't sure she was ready to face the consequences of what had happened the night before. But she had no choice. She had to go to work. She couldn't just hide in her room forever. The day went on slowly, each moment dragging, each task feeling heavier than the last. She did her best to focus on the work in front of her, but her mind kept wandering back to the conversation with Vincent. He had told her to stay, to keep doing her job, and that he would take care of the rest. But what did that really mean? How far would he go to protect her? Would he truly be able to change the way others saw her? She wasn't sure. As she cleaned the main hallway, she heard footsteps approaching. When she turned, she saw Isabella walking towards her, her face a mask of anger. Maria's stomach dropped. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. She braced herself for another confrontation, another accusation, another humiliating moment. Isabella stopped in front of her, her eyes scanning Maria's face with a mix of contempt and curiosity. You're still here? Isabella sneered. Maria stood up straighter, doing her best to keep her composure. She didn't want to show weakness, not now, not after everything Vincent had said. Yes, I am, she replied quietly. Isabella's gaze hardened. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but you're not welcome here. You're lucky Vincent is giving you another chance. But you don't belong in this house. You're nothing but a servant, and you always will be. Maria's heart sank, but she refused to let Isabella see how deeply her words cut. She had heard it all before, the whispers, the judgments. But this time, it didn't feel the same. For the first time, she had someone on her side. Vincent's voice, his protection, rang in her ears. He had told her she mattered. He had told her she was more than just a maid. Isabella's words, as cruel as they were, didn't hold the same power anymore. I'm not here to play games, Maria said, her voice steady. I'm here to work, to do my job, and I'm not going anywhere. Isabella's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a smile that wasn't kind. We'll see about that, she said, her voice dripping with venom. Before Maria could respond, Isabella turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Maria stood there for a moment, her heart racing. She had faced so many challenges before, but this felt different. She had Vincent's support now, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid to stand her ground. The rest of the day passed in a blur of cleaning and quiet tension. She avoided Isabella as much as possible, keeping her head down and doing her work. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. That evening, after dinner, Maria was cleaning the dining room when she heard the sound of Vincent's footsteps behind her. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, watching her with a calm but intense expression. Maria, he said, his voice soft but commanding. Come with me. Maria followed him silently as he led her down the hallway and into his office. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she knew that it wasn't going to be a simple conversation. Vincent closed the door behind them and turned to face her. I've been thinking about everything that happened, he said, his voice low. I want to make sure you're treated with the respect you deserve. Maria blinked, confused. What do you mean? She asked. Vincent's gaze softened as he looked at her. I know you've been through a lot, Maria. And I know you're not used to being treated with respect, but that's going to change. Maria didn't know how to respond. She had never expected anything like this from Vincent. She had never thought that someone like him would ever care about someone like her. But now, standing in front of him, she realized that maybe she was wrong. Maybe she didn't have to settle for being invisible anymore. Maybe she didn't have to hide in the shadows. I want you to stay here, Vincent continued. But I'm not going to just let you be treated like you don't matter. I'm going to make sure that everyone knows you're not just a maid. You're a part of this family. Maria felt the weight of his words settle over her, a strange warmth filling her chest. It felt like a dream, but it was real. She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, Mr. Romano. I don't know what to say. Vincent smiled slightly, a hint of something softer in his expression. You don't have to say anything. Just know that you're not alone in this. Maria stood there, her heart full of gratitude and confusion. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself, but maybe it was the life she had been waiting for. The next few days were a blur for Maria. The mansion, which had once felt like a cold, indifferent place, now seemed to pulse with a strange new energy. There were whispers in the hallways, and she could feel the eyes of the staff on her. But this time it wasn't with the usual disdain. It was different. She was no longer invisible, but she also wasn't sure where she stood. Vincent's words from the previous day replayed in her mind constantly. She wasn't just a maid anymore. He had said she was part of the family. But what did that really mean? She had never thought of herself as part of anything this grand. She was used to being a shadow, to working in silence, never stepping out of line, never expecting recognition. Yet here she was, with the most powerful man in the house speaking to her like she mattered. But there was still something about Isabella's coldness that worried her. Maria had avoided her as much as possible, knowing the tension between them would only grow. The woman had a power over Vincent, and Maria couldn't help but wonder if that would be enough to undo everything. She couldn't shake the feeling that her position here was still fragile. On the fourth day after the confrontation, Maria was called into Vincent's office again. Her heart fluttered nervously as she walked down the familiar corridor. She had gotten used to the house's grandeur, but the fear of being dismissed, even after everything Vincent had promised, still lingered. When she entered his office, Vincent was standing by the window, looking out at the expansive garden below. The moment she walked in, he turned and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Maria, I wanted to talk to you about something important," he said, his tone calm, yet serious. Maria nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I know the past few days have been difficult," he said, "and I know that you've been through a lot. But I need to ask you something." Maria held her breath, wondering what he was going to say. "What is it, sir?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. Vincent walked toward her, his expression unreadable. "I need you to do something for me," he said, his voice lowering. "There's a situation that needs handling, and I think you're the right person for it." Maria felt a pang of worry. What kind of situation could Vincent need her for? She had never been involved in anything beyond cleaning and serving. "What is it?" she asked cautiously. Vincent's eyes softened. "I need you to speak with Isabella. The tension between you two is growing, and I think it's time we put an end to this before it gets worse." Maria felt a jolt of surprise. Speak with Isabella? The woman who had accused her, who had humiliated her in front of everyone. It felt like an impossible task. "You want me to confront her?" Maria asked, her voice trembling slightly. Vincent nodded. "Yes. I know it won't be easy, but you're the only one who can set things straight. Isabella needs to understand that you're not just some servant. You're a part of this house, and I won't allow anyone to treat you like that again." Maria stared at him, uncertain. She had never confronted anyone like this before. She was the one who stayed in the background, who cleaned and worked quietly. But Vincent's words were clear. He wanted her to stand up for herself. "I'll be there to support you," Vincent added. "But this is something you need to do on your own. Show her who you are." Maria hesitated, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had always been passive, letting things happen around her without interference. But now, Vincent was asking her to be bold, to step into a new role, one that she wasn't sure she was ready for. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice firmer than she felt. "I'll talk to her." Vincent smiled, his approval evident. "Good. I know this won't be easy, but you'll do just fine. And remember, I'm always here if you need me." As she left his office, Maria felt a strange sense of resolve wash over her. This was her chance to take control, to show everyone, including herself, that she wasn't powerless. The next day, after her duties were done, Maria made her way to the private wing of the mansion, where Isabella's room was. She had never been in this part of the house before, and as she walked down the long hallway, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of fear and determination. When she reached Isabella's door, she took a deep breath and knocked. The sound of footsteps approached from the inside, and the door swung open. Isabella stood there, her eyes narrowing as she saw who was at the door. "What do you want?" she snapped, her tone icy. Maria felt her stomach tighten, but she refused to let her fear show. "I need to speak with you," Maria said, her voice steady. Isabella raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "About what?" she asked, crossing her arms. "About what happened." "About what you accused me of," Maria said, looking her directly in the eye. "I won't let you treat me like that anymore. I am not a thief." Isabella's eyes flashed with anger, but Maria stood her ground. "I've worked here for 2 years," Maria continued. "I've never caused any trouble. I've done my job, and I won't let you make me out to be something I'm not." There was a long silence, the tension between them palpable. For a moment, Isabella seemed to consider her words, her gaze flickering with something like doubt. But then she quickly masked it, her expression hardening again. "You're lucky Vincent is backing you," she said coldly. "But don't think this means I'll forgive you." Maria didn't flinch. "I don't need your forgiveness. I just need you to respect me." Isabella stood there for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she studied Maria. Then, with a dismissive wave, she stepped aside. "Fine. Do whatever you want," she said. "But don't forget your place." Maria didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away, a small sense of victory swelling inside her. For the first time, she had stood up for herself, and it felt like she had crossed an invisible line. Things were changing, and Maria was beginning to understand that she had the power to change them. The days that followed Maria's confrontation with Isabella were tense, but there was a shift in the atmosphere of the mansion. As time passed, Maria felt the weight of the new role she had unknowingly stepped into. She was no longer just a maid, no longer just a background figure. Vincent had given her a voice, and for the first time, she felt seen. She had stood up for herself and held her ground. And though Isabella's coldness still lingered, Maria felt an unexpected sense of empowerment. But Vincent's presence loomed over her like a shadow, both a source of strength and a reminder of the fragile nature of the position she found herself in. The tension between the two women had not yet subsided. Isabella had not openly apologized, nor had she acknowledged her accusations. Maria knew that things between them would never be the same, but she had no intention of letting that stop her from moving forward. Every day was a reminder that she was still working in the same mansion, still performing the same duties, but now, each task held more significance than it ever had before. She noticed the way the other staff members looked at her, a mix of curiosity and hesitation. They knew something had changed, but none of them dared to ask. She kept to herself, focusing on her work, but she couldn't ignore the occasional glance or the subtle whispers that followed her as she passed. The silence was almost louder than words. It wasn't until one afternoon, several days after her confrontation with Isabella, that Maria found herself summoned once again to Vincent's office. The moment she walked in, she saw him standing by the window, his posture relaxed, as if he had been waiting for her. He turned as she entered, and his eyes met hers with a warmth that was unmistakable. "Maria," he said, his voice steady, "I need to talk to you about something important." Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea what this conversation would entail, but she couldn't deny the sense of anticipation that bubbled up inside her. Was this about Isabella? About the staff? Or perhaps something else entirely? "What is it, Mr. Romano?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm, though her mind raced with questions. Vincent took a few steps toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've been thinking," he began, "about how things have been between us, between you and the staff. I know things aren't perfect, and there's still some tension. But I want you to know that I'm doing everything I can to ensure you're treated fairly." Maria nodded, unsure of what to say. She appreciated Vincent's words, but the reality of her situation had not escaped her. She was still the maid, the outsider in a world that didn't fully accept her. And while Vincent's words gave her hope, the fear of being cast aside again was still fresh in her mind. "I'm aware of the difficulties you've faced," Vincent continued, "and I want to make sure you feel more than just comfortable here. I want to give you something more." Maria blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. Vincent paused, his gaze intensifying. "I want to offer you a position here, one that's more than just cleaning. Something where your skills, your intellect, are truly valued." Maria's breath caught in her throat. "What kind of position?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm offering you a chance to work directly with me," Vincent said, his tone decisive. "I need someone I can trust, someone who understands how this place works. I've seen your potential, Maria, and I want you to be more than just a maid." Maria stood frozen in place, trying to absorb his words. Was he really offering her a chance to do something more? To be a part of something bigger than just cleaning and serving? Her mind raced with the possibilities. She started, but she couldn't find the right words. "You've proven yourself, and I trust you," Vincent said. "You'll have a more important role, one where your responsibilities will be greater, but so will the rewards." Maria's heart swelled with a mix of emotions, surprise, gratitude, fear. She had never imagined this, never thought that someone like her could ever be offered a position like this. She had always been content to serve, to stay in the background, but now, Vincent was giving her the chance to step into the spotlight. "I don't know what to say," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't have to say anything now," Vincent replied. "Take your time. Think about it. But know that the opportunity is there if you want it." Maria stood there, her mind spinning. The idea of working directly with Vincent, being a part of something more, was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had spent her entire life being overlooked, never daring to hope for anything more than survival. But now, she had been given a chance to change her life, to change her future. She didn't know what the next step would be, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she had control over it. As she left Vincent's office, her heart was heavy with the weight of his offer. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that everything was about to change. She was no longer just a maid in the shadows. She was someone who could make her own path, someone who could take control of her destiny. And for the first time, that scared her less than the thought of staying invisible forever. The days that followed Vincent's offer were filled with a mix of excitement and uncertainty for Maria. The chance to step out of the shadows, to work directly with the powerful Mafia boss, was something she never thought would happen in her wildest dreams. She had spent years working quietly, invisible to most people, but now she was being given an opportunity to prove her worth. It was both thrilling and terrifying. As the days passed, she couldn't help but feel a rising sense of anxiety. She had never been part of something like this, and the thought of being responsible for more than just cleaning made her second-guess herself. What if she wasn't good enough? What if Vincent had made a mistake? Despite her doubts, she couldn't ignore the part of her that longed for more. She had been overlooked for so long, and this was a chance to change everything. The next week, Vincent called her into his office again. This time, his tone was more serious, more determined. "Maria, I want to see how you handle things," he said, looking her directly in the eyes. "You're going to start with a small task. If you handle it well, we'll take it from there." Maria nodded, her heart pounding. What kind of task was this? Was it a test? "I'm ready," she said, trying to sound confident. Vincent smiled slightly. "I know you are. There's a meeting with one of our suppliers tomorrow. I need you to sit in and take notes. Nothing too complicated, just a few things to keep track of." Maria's stomach twisted at the thought. She had never been in a business meeting before, let alone one involving the Mafia. But she was determined to prove herself. "I understand," she replied, her voice steady. The next day, Maria arrived early to the office, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged the papers on the desk. She had spent the morning reading through notes Vincent had given her, trying to familiarize herself with the terminology and the business. She wasn't a stranger to the workings of the mansion, but this was something entirely new. As the clock ticked closer to the meeting time, Maria's nerves grew. What if she made a mistake? What if she couldn't keep up with the conversation? She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. At exactly 2 o'clock, the door to the office opened, and Vincent walked in, followed by 2 men in suits, their expressions serious and professional. Maria stood up quickly, trying to appear composed, though she couldn't help but feel out of place. Vincent introduced her to the men, one of whom was the supplier, a man named Alessandro. He was older, with a sharp look in his eyes and a demeanor that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. "This is Maria," Vincent said, his voice commanding yet warm. "She'll be taking notes for us today." Alessandro gave her a brief nod, his expression unreadable. "Nice to meet you," he said in a low voice. Maria forced a smile, trying to hide the nervousness bubbling up inside her. As the meeting began, she sat quietly in the corner, listening intently as Vincent and the supplier discussed numbers, deals, and future shipments. At first, she felt like an outsider, unable to follow the fast-paced conversation. But as time passed, she began to understand more. She took meticulous notes, jotting down key points, making sure she didn't miss anything important. The meeting lasted for over an hour, and by the end, Maria had filled several pages with detailed notes. As the men stood to leave, Vincent turned to her. "Good job, Maria. You kept up well," he said, his tone approving. Maria felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had been part of something important, and she hadn't made a fool of herself. As the door closed behind the men, Vincent turned to her again. "I'm impressed," he said. "You showed that you can handle more than just cleaning. I think you're ready for more." Maria's heart skipped a beat. "Thank you, Mr. Romano," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "I'll keep working hard." Vincent smiled, a rare expression of warmth crossing his face. "I know you will, and I'm glad you're here." As Maria left the office that afternoon, she felt a sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. She had been tested, and she had passed. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who mattered. She had been given an opportunity to prove herself, and she wasn't going to waste it. But as she walked through the mansion, her thoughts turned to Isabella. The woman had been cold to her ever since their confrontation, and Maria knew that the tension between them wasn't over. Isabella had made it clear that she still saw Maria as beneath her. But now, Maria wasn't afraid. She had Vincent's support, and that gave her the strength to face whatever came next. She was ready to take on whatever challenges the future held, knowing that she wasn't alone. Vincent had shown her that she had a place in this world, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. The next day, as Maria was finishing up her duties, she overheard a conversation between Isabella and one of the other staff members. She didn't mean to listen, but the words caught her attention. "I don't care what Vincent says." Isabella's voice was cold. "She's still nothing more than a maid." Maria's heart sank, but she didn't let it show. She had expected this. Isabella would never see her as anything more than someone to be looked down upon. But Maria wasn't going to let her words affect her anymore. She was stronger than that. She was more than that. And no matter what Isabella said, Maria was finally starting to believe it. Tension inside the Romano mansion had been building like a storm waiting for the right strike of lightning. Maria had stepped into a new role, proving herself capable, steady, and trustworthy. But the deeper she moved into Vincent's world, the more she could sense the resistance rising around her. Especially from Isabella. The fiancé who had once humiliated her in front of an entire room had not forgiven her, and the resentment simmered under every glance, every silence, every calculated flicker of the eyes. It was only a matter of time before everything reached a breaking point. That moment came on a Friday evening when Vincent hosted a formal dinner gathering with several high-profile business partners. The mansion glowed with warm lights, the air filled with the scent of fresh floral arrangements and expensive cologne. Guests mingled by the long dining table, laughter echoing across the room. Maria moved through the space, not as a maid but as Vincent's assistant for the night, carrying a leather folder of documents and keeping track of schedules, requests, and last-minute needs. She had been nervous at first, but Vincent's steady presence had kept her grounded. She walked confidently now, no longer shrinking into corners. But Isabella watched her from a distance, her eyes sharp, her posture rigid with jealousy and fury. Isabella had been losing control. She knew it. Everyone could see it. She had always been the center of attention, the queen of every room. But lately the spotlight had begun to shift toward the quiet young woman she had tried to destroy. And tonight, Isabella's patience snapped. As the main dinner concluded and guests prepared for a private discussion in the lounge, Maria approached the table to clear a few files Vincent had asked her to organize. That was when Isabella struck, her voice slicing through the air like ice. "There she is," Isabella said loudly enough for several guests to turn. "The little thief who somehow managed to crawl her way back in here." Maria froze. Conversations around the room died immediately. The clink of glasses stopped. A thick silence settled like dust. Maria kept her gaze lowered, her breath steady, her mind repeating the same quiet mantra she had carried for years: stay calm, stay quiet, stay invisible. But tonight, she was no longer invisible. Isabella stepped closer, her tone dripping with venom. "You think we do not see what you are doing?" she hissed. "Walking around like you belong here. Acting as if you are important, as if Vincent needs you. You are nothing but hired help. You always will be." Maria felt her face flush with embarrassment, her throat tightening. She could feel every pair of eyes on her. An old familiar ache rose inside her, the instinct to shrink, to disappear. But another voice, quieter but stronger, echoed in her chest. "Vincent believes in you. You do not deserve this." Before she could find her breath to respond, Isabella snatched the folder from Maria's hands and let the papers scatter across the floor. The guests gasped softly as pages fluttered around Maria's feet. "Pick them up," Isabella commanded coldly, her arms crossed. "Or is that too much to ask from someone who already stole from us once?" Maria's hands trembled, but she did not bend down. Not this time. Her breathing steadied as she stared at the scattered papers. She felt tears forming in the back of her eyes, but she forced them back. She would not break. Not tonight. Isabella noticed her hesitation and stepped closer, her voice rising. "I said pick them up. That is your job. Or did you forget?" Maria lifted her chin slowly, her voice soft but firm. "I did not steal anything," she said, her words steady even as her heart pounded. "And I will not be spoken to like this." The room fell into complete silence. You could hear the faint hum of the chandelier above them. Isabella's face twisted in fury. "How dare you talk back to me?" she spat. "You think Vincent will choose you over me?" Maria swallowed hard, her voice still calm. "I am just doing my job. That is all." Isabella scoffed and grabbed a glass of wine from the table. Before anyone could react, she raised her hand and flung the drink toward Maria. Gasps erupted from the guests. But the wine never touched her. A hand stopped Isabella mid-motion, gripping her wrist firmly. Every head in the room turned. Vincent stood behind Isabella, his expression cold as stone, his voice cutting through the air with lethal precision. Enough. Isabella's eyes widened in shock. Vincent stepped between them, placing himself directly in front of Maria. His posture was protective, commanding, unwavering. "You will not touch her," he said, his voice low. "And you will not speak to her that way again." The room went still. Isabella jerked her hand back, her voice trembling with outrage. "Vincent, she is lying to you. She is manipulating you. She is nothing but—" "Do not finish that sentence," Vincent warned sharply. "You have humiliated her enough, and I will not tolerate it." Isabella stared at him, disbelief etched across her face. "You are defending her? After everything?" Vincent turned his head slightly, his voice firm. "I saw the footage, Isabella. You accused an innocent woman, and instead of apologizing, you doubled down on your cruelty." Silence engulfed the room. Isabella looked around wildly, realizing the guests had witnessed everything. Her reputation, her pride, her control, it all crumbled in an instant. But Vincent was not done. "Maria stays," he said clearly. "And as of this moment, you and I are done." A stunned murmur rippled through the room. Isabella staggered back, shock draining the color from her face. "You cannot be serious," she whispered. Vincent's answer was calm, final. "Gather your things and leave my house tonight." Maria stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. This was the moment everything shifted. The moment justice finally stepped into the room, and the mansion fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The days following Vincent's decision were both surreal and liberating for Maria. The mansion, which had always felt like a cage of judgment and scrutiny, now seemed like a place where she could finally breathe. The shift in power was undeniable. Isabella, the woman who had once made her life unbearable, had been sent packing, her humiliation as public as the false accusations she had hurled at Maria. But even as the mansion seemed to quiet down in the wake of that confrontation, Maria knew there was still much to deal with. The staff was on edge, their eyes lingering on her in curiosity and, perhaps, suspicion. Some were supportive, others uncertain. Maria couldn't blame them. She had spent so many years as a shadow in their world, and suddenly, she was thrust into the center of it all. She had to prove that she belonged, that she wasn't a mistake. For days, she did. Her job as usual, focusing on the work she had always done, cleaning, organizing, and preparing meals. But now, she was more than just the maid. Vincent had made that clear. He was keeping his word. There was something in the way he spoke to her now, a new level of respect, and, perhaps, something else. Maria didn't dare to assume too much, but it was impossible to ignore the subtle changes. One evening, as she was putting the finishing touches on the dinner table for one of Vincent's private gatherings, she was summoned again to his office. The butterflies in her stomach fluttered with a mix of excitement and fear. She didn't know what to expect. She had been called before, but this felt different. She had proven herself before, but this time, something inside her told her that this would be a turning point. When she arrived, Vincent was waiting for her, standing by the large oak desk in his office. His expression was serious, yet there was a softness in his eyes that put Maria at ease. "Maria," he began, his voice calm, "I've been thinking." She waited for him to continue, her heart racing in her chest. "You've handled yourself with grace," Vincent said, "and you've earned my trust. But I think it's time for you to take the next step." Maria blinked, unsure of what he meant. "Next step?" she repeated softly. Vincent turned toward the large window behind him, his gaze focused on the horizon. "I want you to become more involved in the running of the household," he said. "I know you've been more than just a maid in my eyes for a while now, and I want to make that official." Maria's mind raced, but she didn't speak. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, but at the same time, she knew she couldn't back down now. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Vincent met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. "I'm offering you a position as my personal assistant," he said. "You'll have more responsibility, more authority, and more respect. It's a big change, but I believe you're ready for it." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined anything like this. She had spent her life serving others, doing what she was told, and now she was being offered a position of power, a place by Vincent's side. She had thought that being invisible, being silent, was the safest way to survive, but now she was being asked to step into the light. "I don't know what to say," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Vincent smiled, his expression softening. "You don't have to say anything now," he said. "But think about it. This is an opportunity to change your life, Maria. You've earned it." Maria stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. She had come so far, from the woman who was humiliated and fired to the woman standing before Vincent now, with an offer she never thought would come. She thought about her past, about how small and invisible she had always been. But now, she had a chance to rewrite her story. She could do more. She could be more. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice steady. "I'll take the position." Vincent nodded, a small but approving smile on his lips. "Good. I knew you would." As she left his office, Maria felt the weight of her decision settle in. She had just taken the first step into a new world, a world where she was no longer invisible. But as she made her way through the mansion, her thoughts turned to Isabella. Despite everything that had happened, Isabella's presence still lingered in the back of her mind. Maria knew the woman wouldn't give up so easily, and she couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would Isabella try to regain her position in Vincent's life? Would she try to tear Maria down again? As much as Maria hated to admit it, she knew that Isabella would always be a threat. But now, Maria wasn't afraid. She had Vincent's support. She had her own strength. And for the first time, Maria truly felt like she belonged in this world. She wasn't just a maid. She was someone who mattered. The path ahead wasn't easy, but it was hers to walk. And no one, not even Isabella, would take that away from her. In the weeks that followed, Maria's life at the mansion began to shift in ways she hadn't expected. As Vincent's personal assistant, she found herself immersed in a new world, one filled with responsibility, but also one that was uncomfortably close to the chaos of the Mafia world she had never truly understood. She was no longer just a maid, but she had not yet fully found her place among the elite of Vincent's inner circle. The work was demanding, and though she was growing more confident in her new role, there were moments when she still felt like an outsider. But every task she completed, every meeting she sat through, slowly built her reputation within the household. Yet, no matter how much she tried to avoid it, Isabella's shadow loomed large over her. Despite being dismissed by Vincent, Isabella had not disappeared entirely. The former fiancée still had her ways of influencing the mansion's atmosphere, and Maria could feel the tension building every time they crossed paths. For now, though, it seemed like the battle had shifted from the open to the subtle. Maria had proven herself, but she wasn't blind to the fact that Isabella would keep testing her, pushing her, trying to reclaim some power. One evening, Vincent called Maria into his office. She had been busy organizing papers, preparing notes for an upcoming meeting with a supplier. Her heart skipped a beat as she approached the door, wondering what this meeting would entail. When she entered, Vincent was sitting behind his desk, looking over some documents. His eyes lifted when she stepped inside, and for a moment, their gazes locked. "Maria, come in," he said, his voice soft yet commanding. She walked in, and the door clicked shut behind her. She stood before him, waiting for him to speak. Vincent set down the papers and leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "How are you adjusting to the new role?" he asked, studying her with a hint of curiosity. Maria hesitated for a moment, then gave him a small smile. "It's been challenging, but I'm managing," she replied, trying to hide the uncertainty in her voice. Vincent nodded. "I've been watching you closely. You've come a long way in a short amount of time. You're handling things well." His praise, while modest, made Maria's chest swell with a mixture of pride and gratitude. She had spent years working in silence, and now, Vincent was acknowledging her. For so long, she had been nothing but a maid, a shadow. But now, for the first time, she was being seen. She stood taller, more confident than she had ever been before. "Thank you, Mr. Romano. I'm doing my best," Maria said. Vincent's lips curled slightly into a smile. "I know you are," he said. "That's why I want to give you more responsibility. You're ready for it." Maria's heart raced. More responsibility? She had already stepped into a role she had never thought she would have. But this? What was Vincent asking of her now? "What kind of responsibility?" she asked, though her voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. Vincent's gaze softened, and he stood up from his desk, walking toward the window. He gazed out over the mansion's vast grounds for a moment before turning back to face her. I want you to start taking more control over the day-to-day operations here, he said. Not just assisting with events, but managing things like the staff, inventory, and even some of the business affairs that need oversight. Maria's mind spun. She had never imagined being responsible for so much, especially in such a high-stakes environment. The idea of overseeing staff, managing business dealings, it was a far cry from the quiet work she had done before. But Vincent's confidence in her made her hesitate for only a moment. I trust you, Vincent said, his voice calm but firm. You've earned it, and I want to see you succeed. Maria nodded, though the weight of his words felt heavy on her shoulders. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this kind of responsibility, but she also knew that this was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. I won't let you down, she said, her voice steady. Vincent's gaze softened, and he smiled again. I know you won't. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Maria found herself managing the staff schedule, meeting with suppliers, and overseeing the mansion's daily operations. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed, unsure of herself, but she pushed through. With Vincent's support, she found a confidence she had never known. However, just as Maria was starting to settle into her new role, a new challenge arose. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Maria walked into the staff break room to find Isabella waiting for her. The moment their eyes met, the tension in the room was palpable. Isabella was standing near the door, her arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. So, you've come a long way, Isabella said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I guess Vincent's giving you the world now, isn't he? Maria stood still for a moment, her heart pounding. She had expected something like this. Isabella wouldn't let her off the hook so easily. But Maria was no longer afraid. She had learned to stand up for herself. I'm just doing my job, Maria replied evenly, not backing down. Isabella's smirk faltered, but she quickly recovered. You think you've won, don't you? She sneered. You're nothing more than a servant, no matter what Vincent tells you. Maria felt her breath catch, but she refused to let Isabella see her vulnerability. You're wrong, Maria said firmly. I'm not a servant. I'm more than that, and I don't need your approval. For a moment, Isabella's eyes flared with anger, but then, as quickly as it had come, it disappeared. She gave Maria one last disdainful look before turning and leaving the room. Maria stood there, her heart racing, but a sense of relief washed over her. For the first time, she had stood up to Isabella, and it felt like victory. The battle wasn't over, but Maria had crossed a line. She was no longer the invisible maid. She was a woman with power, with purpose, and with a place in this world. And no one, not even Isabella, would take that from her. Days turned into weeks, and Maria continued her new role with growing confidence. Each passing day, she felt less like the woman who had once been humiliated and more like someone who had a purpose in the Romano household. The mansion, which had once been a place of quiet survival, was now a place where Maria had a voice. She had responsibilities now, real ones. Managing the household, overseeing the staff, and dealing with Vincent's business affairs. These were the things that occupied her thoughts and her time. But even as she settled into her role, she couldn't ignore the undercurrent of tension that lingered between her and Isabella. Though she had managed to stand her ground in the past, Maria knew that Isabella would never let her go without a fight. And as the days stretched on, Isabella's subtle jabs became more frequent. She made sure to pass by Maria with pointed remarks, the kind that were meant to remind her of her place. At first, Maria took it in stride. She knew she had to keep her focus on the bigger picture. But as the weeks passed, something inside her started to change. She was no longer the quiet maid. She was no longer the one who would be ignored or disrespected. She was someone who mattered. And with that realization came a new sense of power. The confrontation with Isabella, however, was inevitable. Maria could feel it in the air, that moment when things would come to a head. That moment came one evening, during another high-profile gathering at the mansion. Vincent had invited several of his closest business associates to discuss important deals. The mansion was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the hum of conversation. Maria was busy overseeing the event, making sure everything ran smoothly. She was no longer just a background figure. She was actively involved, coordinating everything with a practiced hand. As she moved through the crowd, She caught a glimpse of Isabella standing near one of the windows, talking to a group of guests. Their conversation stopped as soon as Isabella saw Maria. A cold smirk spread across her face, and Maria could feel the familiar sting of disdain. She had never let Isabella's words affect her before, but something about this moment felt different. It wasn't just Isabella's presence, it was the challenge in her gaze. As if she was daring Maria to keep moving forward, to keep standing tall. Maria took a deep breath and walked past, ignoring the glare from Isabella. But just as she passed, she heard Isabella's voice, sharp and cutting. "You think you belong here, don't you?" she said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. Maria stopped in her tracks, her body stiffening. For a moment, the room fell silent. All eyes were on her. She could feel the weight of their gazes, the quiet judgment hanging in the air. But this time, Maria didn't flinch. She turned slowly to face Isabella, her expression calm, composed. "I do belong here," she said, her voice steady. "I've earned my place." The words hung in the air, charged with meaning. Isabella's eyes narrowed, a sneer tugging at the corner of her lips. "You haven't earned anything," she spat. "You're nothing but a hired hand. A maid who thinks she's something more." The words were meant to wound, to provoke. But Maria didn't let them land. She had heard it all before. And now, she was no longer that woman who would shrink away. "I'm not just a maid," Maria said, her voice unwavering. "I'm someone who works hard, who contributes, and who deserves respect." Isabella took a step closer, her eyes flashing with contempt. "You think Vincent's going to protect you forever?" she sneered. "You're nothing without him." Maria stood tall, her heart beating steadily in her chest. She didn't need to prove herself to Isabella. She had already done that. She had already earned Vincent's trust, and that was enough. "I don't need anyone to protect me," Maria said firmly. "And I certainly don't need your approval." For a moment, there was only silence. Isabella glared at her, a mixture of fury and disbelief crossing her face. And then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving the guests to murmur among themselves. Maria watched her go, her own breath slow and steady. She didn't feel victorious, not in the way she had expected, but there was a sense of calm that settled over her. She had stood her ground. She had shown everyone, including herself, that she was no longer the invisible woman she had once been. As the evening progressed, Maria found herself glancing at Vincent across the room. He caught her eye and gave her a small, approving nod. In that moment, she knew that everything had changed. She had claimed her place in the mansion, not because Vincent had given it to her, but because she had earned it. She wasn't just a maid, and she never would be again. The world had shifted for her, and it was hers to command. And as she looked out over the guests gathered in the ballroom, Maria knew one thing for certain. She was in control of her own destiny. No one, not even Isabella, could take that away from her. As the weeks passed, Maria's life within the mansion continued to evolve in ways she hadn't expected. With Vincent's trust, she found herself navigating through a world that had once seemed out of reach. She wasn't just Vincent's personal assistant anymore. She was part of a carefully constructed world of power, influence, and responsibility. But even as she settled into her new life, there was an undercurrent of tension that never fully left. She had managed to win her place in Vincent's world, but Isabella, though defeated, had not entirely vanished. Her cold, calculating nature still had the ability to make Maria feel like an outsider. It was clear to Maria that Isabella's pride had taken a hard blow. She was no longer Vincent's fiancée, and in front of the staff and guests, she had become a mere shadow of her former self. But that didn't mean she had given up on making Maria's life difficult. And one evening, as Maria prepared for another of Vincent's private business gatherings, she could feel it. The tension was thick in the air. As Vincent hosted more high-stakes meetings, the mansion had become a constant whirlwind of business deals, negotiations, and appearances. Maria had become accustomed to the chaos, but tonight was different. She had been asked to manage everything for the evening, seating, menus, even making sure the guests felt at ease. The pressure was high, but Maria was confident. This was the kind of work she was good at now. The night had begun as any other. The guests were seated, drinks were served, and Vincent had taken his place at the head of the table, talking business with a few trusted associates. Maria stood nearby, her eyes scanning the room, making sure everything was running smoothly. And then, she felt it. A sharp gaze, followed by a soft click of heels against the marble floors. Isabella appeared from the corner of the room, her eyes locked on Maria, her lips curling into a barely concealed sneer. Maria could feel the old fear and tension rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. She was no longer the person who would shrink in the face of this woman's cruelty. She stood tall, ignoring the way Isabella's eyes seemed to burn into her. But it wasn't just the gaze that caused Maria's heart to race. Isabella was approaching, her movements deliberate, as if preparing for some confrontation. As Maria made her way to the back of the room, she could hear Isabella's heels echoing, and the sharpness of her voice cut through the low hum of conversation. "So this is what you've become." Isabella's voice was laced with bitterness. Maria's pulse quickened, but she didn't turn. She didn't want to engage. "Not here, not now." "Excuse me," Maria responded, her back still to Isabella as she adjusted a set of glasses on the table. "You really think Vincent will let you take my place?" Isabella's voice was growing louder, her steps closing the distance between them. "You think you're some sort of equal? You're just a maid, nothing more." Maria's breath caught, but she kept her composure. This wasn't the same Maria who had once been humiliated. She had proven her worth, and she wasn't about to let Isabella tear that down. She turned slowly, her eyes locking with Isabella's. "I'm not just a maid," Maria said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded. "I'm someone who has earned a place here, and I'm not going anywhere." Isabella's face twisted with disdain. "Earned a place? You've done nothing but crawl into Vincent's good graces. You think he'll protect you forever?" She stepped closer, trying to intimidate Maria. "You'll always be beneath me, and you know it." Maria felt her hands tense, but she stood her ground. "No, Isabella," she said, her voice unwavering. "You're wrong. I don't need Vincent's protection. I earned my place because of my own work. Not because of him, and not because of you." The words hung in the air, a sharp contrast to Isabella's venomous tone. For a moment, Isabella's composure faltered. Maria could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. It was as if for the first time, Isabella realized that Maria wasn't afraid anymore. Maria wasn't just someone to be humiliated or dismissed. She was someone who had changed her fate. The room fell silent, and all eyes were on the two women. Isabella's gaze flickered around the room, but instead of responding, she turned on her heel and walked away, her steps echoing down the hall. Maria stood still for a moment, her breath slow and steady. The encounter had been brief, but it had confirmed something she had already known. She was no longer the victim in this mansion. Isabella had tried to reassert her power, but Maria wasn't backing down. Vincent had made it clear that she was not just a maid, and she would not allow anyone, not even Isabella, to undermine that. As the night carried on, the guests' conversations resumed, and the business deal continued without interruption. But Maria couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She had stood up for herself. She had faced the woman who had tried to tear her down, and she had walked away victorious. For the first time, Maria felt in control of her life. She wasn't just part of the background anymore. She was in charge of her own destiny, and nothing, not even Isabella, would take that away from her. The evening continued, but Maria felt a new sense of strength within her. She was not just Vincent's assistant. She was a woman who had fought for her place, who had earned it, and who had nothing left to fear. Isabella could try all she wanted to tear her down, but it was too late. Maria had already won. The weeks that followed the tense encounter with Isabella were filled with quiet, but profound change for Maria. She had not only survived the storm that Isabella had tried to unleash, but she had also risen above it. Vincent, ever steady in his support, continued to offer her opportunities that she had once only dreamed of. With each passing day, Maria found herself moving further into the world she had once only observed from the edges. The mansion had become her home in ways she had never imagined possible. She was no longer just an employee. She was an integral part of the inner workings of the Romano household. As the days stretched into weeks, Maria continued to earn the respect of the staff and the business partners who came and went from the mansion. Her reputation had shifted entirely. She was no longer the invisible maid, but a woman who had earned her place through hard work, determination, and the unshakable support of Vincent. It wasn't just about the role she held anymore. It was about the confidence she had gained, the belief in her own strength. But even as she thrived, She couldn't ignore the occasional glance from the staff. Some were still unsure about her, unsure of how Vincent could put so much faith in someone like her. Yet, every time she passed one of them, she carried herself with the knowledge that she had earned her place. The mansion, once a symbol of her limitations, was now a place where she could move freely, a place where her presence was no longer questioned. One day, as Maria was finishing up her daily duties, Vincent called her to his office. She walked in, feeling the familiar thrill of anticipation that she had grown to expect from her meetings with him. Vincent was standing by the window, his hands clasped behind his back. When he saw her, he smiled. "Maria," he said, his voice warm, "I've been thinking." Maria stood still, waiting. Vincent turned to face her fully. "You've proven yourself in ways I hadn't even expected. You've taken on responsibilities I never thought possible, and I'm proud of you." Maria felt her heart swell. She had worked so hard to prove herself, and Vincent's praise meant more than she had ever realized. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice steady. Vincent's expression softened. "But now it's time to take it one step further," he continued. "I've been offered a new partnership that could change everything for us. It's an opportunity to expand our operations, but it's going to take someone with vision, someone with the skills to handle it." Maria's heart raced. "What are you asking, Mr. Romano?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vincent's eyes locked with hers, and she saw something in them that she hadn't seen before. "I want you to lead this new venture, Maria. I want you to oversee this partnership and make sure everything runs smoothly. This is your chance to show everyone, including yourself, that you're not just capable, you're essential." Maria's breath caught in her throat. Let a partnership? Oversee it? It was a role she had never imagined, but now, it seemed like it was within her grasp. She had always dreamed of being more, of having a voice, of being someone who made a real difference. And now, Vincent was giving her that chance. She stared at him for a moment, unsure if she could believe what he was saying. "But I've never done anything like this before," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know if I'm ready." Vincent smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "You are. I wouldn't offer it to you if I didn't believe in you, Maria. You've proven yourself time and time again. You've earned this, and I trust you to make the right decisions." Maria stood there, her heart racing. This was it. This was the moment she had been working toward, the moment that would define her future. She thought back to the woman she had been when she first arrived at the mansion, the woman who had felt invisible, unworthy. She was no longer that person. She was someone who had fought for her place, who had taken control of her destiny. And now, she had the chance to shape her future even further. "I'll do it," Maria said, her voice filled with determination. "I won't let you down." Vincent nodded, a proud smile on his face. "I know you won't." The days that followed were filled with long hours of planning, organizing, and negotiating. Maria worked tirelessly, but with each challenge she faced, she grew more confident. She was no longer just a part of Vincent's world. She was building her own world, her own legacy. It wasn't easy. There were obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but Maria never faltered. She had fought for everything she had, and now, she was determined to make it count. In time, her success became undeniable. The new partnership flourished, bringing in more opportunities than Vincent had ever expected. Maria's influence grew, and soon, the mansion that had once been a place of shadows became a place where her voice carried weight. She wasn't just Vincent's assistant anymore. She was his equal. And as she stood in the mansion one evening, looking out over the grounds she had come to call home, Maria knew one thing for certain. She had earned her place, and no one could take that away from her. The woman who had once been dismissed, disrespected, and underestimated was now a force to be reckoned with. And nothing, not even the shadows of her past, could hold her back.